everyone does desire to belong in some form or fashion, and that is really closely tied to acceptance. Going back to that, and how I think real inclusion means that every person has the space to feel safe in being fully who they are.
Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspects of running and what helps people to achieve success, however they define it, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. Thank you to Hydro for sponsoring this episode. Hydro is an immersive workout experience designed to bring the physical, mental, and emotional experience of on-water rowing straight to your home. Hydro workouts are quick, efficient, and low impact. Rowing for just 20 minutes a day provides you with a full body workout, which engages 86% of your major muscle groups. For context, cycling engages 44%. Head to hydro.com to check them out. That's hydrow.com to learn more. Be sure to use the code FTLR100 to save $100 on your order. This episode is brought to you by Freedom Solar Power. When I first started looking into solar, I thought it would be a clunky and expensive process. I've learned it isn't nearly as hard as you think. Freedom Solar Power makes it simple. They provide a turnkey solution that is focused on educating their customers on the experience from installation to everyday use and savings. They ensure you have all the information needed to make sure going solar is right for you. From firsthand experience, it makes sense both financially and for the environment. With no down payment required, solar not only adds immediate value to your home, but it's also great for the environment and might even provide immediate savings, not to mention the year-end tax benefits, a credit of 26% this year. Freedom Solar operates in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida, and there are plenty of other great options nationwide. Thank you to Tracksmith for sponsoring this episode. Tracksmith is an independent running brand inspired by a deep love of the sport. Their spring collection is now available and features staples thoughtfully designed for this season of training. From their versatile session tops cut from a soft stretch knit to Lane 5 and Reggie short tights perfect for racing a marathon, these pieces are built to work as hard as you do. Tracksmith is a brand for committed runners like you and me, people who know that the best part of a busy day is squeezing in a workout. They offer products for training, racing, and rest days, which you know I'm a fan of, and create experiences that make running more rewarding, more connected, and more meaningful. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN will receive free shipping, and 5% of the purchase amount will be donated to the Michael J. Fox Foundation to help find a cure and support those living with Parkinson's. Welcome back. I have Carolyn Sue joining me from Boston. Carolyn, thanks so much for taking some time to chat today and bearing with my technical difficulties.
No, it's no problem at all. And I'm glad we can make this work.
For sure. So the first question has become a bit of a tradition here. Some people prepare for it, some don't, and it catches them by surprise. So we're going to dive right into it. Who is Carolyn?
Who is Carolyn?
The million-dollar question.
It is. Well, I am a Chinese American. I was born and raised in Texas, now living here in the Boston area with my family. I am a runner. I am a mother, a wife. I'm a person who, because of my faith, I think there's just, I guess, one of my purposes in life is to help equip and empower others to be able to, I don't know, it sounds cheesy, but live our best lives,
Make the world a better place.
World of peace. But yeah, I think I find a lot of joy in lifting up others and experiencing life together to the fullest.
Very cool. And how did you find running?
How did I find running? I honestly, well, starting in around middle school, I started to develop like disordered eating habits and like just body image issues. And as a result of that, I religiously studied all these health and fitness magazines and really sought different ways to conform myself to whatever standards, I perceived were acceptable, whether they were like beauty standards or just, standards of self worth and identity and meaning and purpose, and all of that kind of really blew up more so once I got to college. And that's how I discovered running. It was just through these fitness magazines, I guess, that describe running as an efficient way of, calorie burning and getting lean and all that stuff. And so I was like, okay, I've been going to the gym ever since I was 14 and trying all these different classes and machines. And why not give running a try? And that's honestly how I stumbled into it.
And so that was a couple of years ago.
Oh,
And
yeah, just a
I,
couple
I,
of years.
I imagine there have been quite a few miles in between then and now.
Yeah.
What did that journey look like for you?
Um, well, I mean, I think for so many of us, running is a mechanism through which, we learn more about ourselves and we learn about just how to navigate life. And so, even though I think in the beginning, I saw running just simply as a means to an end, right? Like a tool to try to help me find my, I don't know, just find acceptance. Honestly, initially, I thought it was a tool to help me gain acceptance by my peers, but eventually, really, it became a way. Running has become a way that I learned to accept myself for myself. After I discovered what a marathon was, I started to train for my first marathon back in 2003, 2004. And I just really loved the, not consist, yeah, in a way, it's like the consistency of having a training plan and running, but more or less like it was this source of predictability and stability for me. Especially, I mean, in college, I was really just trying to find myself. And so much is constantly changing and happening when you're a college student. And in the midst of all of those changes, every semester, every month, it felt like I knew that as long as I was following this training plan, I could go out and run whatever was prescribed and I could get that done. And if I could get that done, like that just gave me this sense of like, groundedness, like, okay, I did this, I set out to do what I wanted to do. And then that just kind of continued to carry on like that. I guess like that subconscious appreciation for running continued on through all the other seasons of my life, like becoming a mother. And then also like when my family, we moved um, across country. First, we moved to California, and then we moved back to Texas, and then we moved finally out here to Massachusetts. But through it all, too, my husband and I, we were dealing with some significant mental health issues, and so life in general just was very chaotic. And the only predictable thing was that it was unpredictable. But through it all, again, like running was this like consistent thread that I didn't have any like set time, like, oh, I ran every morning or I ran every evening or anything like that. It was just whenever, if ever, I was able to get out for even just like a 30-minute run, 45-minute run, that was what just kept me alive, figuratively speaking, through all these different seasons in life. So,
It's interesting you reflected on the only consistency is inconsistency,
mm,
or unpredictability. The only predictability was the fact that it was unpredictable, and you were able to ground yourself through the one thing that you could count on. I think a lot of people find structure in that
mhm,
there's one thing that you know is going to happen, and you can anchor everything else around there. I've talked a lot about like, is running selfish? Is running not selfish? And the way you're using it here is definitely not, right? Like you've been able to establish something that you're able to count on. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that related to mental health and all of the things that surround, like, how do we like put day after day after day when things are really challenging? And so it's a cool way to, string the days together that are wildly unpredictable with some sense of predictability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the cool thing is like running in a way is also just like a parallel or maybe reflection of the different seasons of life that we go through, whether they're like planned seasons or not, that there are going to be times, there are going to be seasons in your life where there really is not necessarily like this structured training plan that you are following, and that maybe you're simply just surviving, and finding those pockets of time that you can get out, move your body, and give yourself that mental space. And then there are other seasons where, like, yeah, you can be dedicating and prioritizing, like chunks of time every day to building up towards your A goal race or something. And then there are other times where it's like injury, and you're not necessarily actively running, but you are learning how to strengthen other areas of your body and of your mind so that you can run. Like I just find
Yeah.
that to be really, I love thinking through the parallels like that, because that really is just like how our life is.
Right. If it were linear, it would be boring. And if we were achieving all of our running related goals all the time, then what? Like,
Right.
what's the point if it's all
Right.
easy? Um, I've talked with Mary Johnson on this podcast about the same concept of seasons of life related to motherhood, related to training and injury and being in peak fitness and whatnot. And I think it's an interesting way to put it. Like having the expectation that it's not always going to be good allows you to both be grateful that it is good when it's good, and when it's bad, understand that like this too shall pass. And it's not going to suck forever. And if it is, you should see a doctor or something like that, or a
Yeah.
physio or whatnot. So the managing of your own expectations is definitely important in that way, and I think it's a good way to do it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's definitely easier easier said than done. And I think I mean, it really has been just through all these ups and downs that for myself, I've learned to reframe even like what what quantifies or what qualifies something as like good, like this was a good run versus like bad. And just being able to, yeah, reframe and understand for yourself that like the good and bad, I guess, isn't necessarily tied to our performance and execution of perfection, right? And just learning to appreciate the effort that we have today, where we are today. Definitely.
So for you, what does qualify a run as a good run? Like for me today, I went out and I was like, I feel fucking amazing in the first quarter mile, not physically, but mentally. Like I did a workout yesterday and then another workout, and physically I felt kind of wrecked. But there was just something like, I'm so grateful that this is my playground. I get to do this and I feel really good. I'm running with a friend. Like for me, that's a good run. It doesn't have to be,
Mm-hmm.
super fast paces or running with this dog that's sitting next to me right here. So I'm curious for you, what qualifies as good?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, for me, over these years, I've really had to be intentional at reframing that for myself, because I am so like performance oriented, and historically, I like numbers really can get me. I don't know, like too. I can get too caught up in numbers, and so I've had to learn, with the help of coaches and also like mental health counselors, to really focus on like my effort. And even for this training cycle right now, I've been training for a marathon that's coming up in May, but like my coach and I, like my coach, she knows my history and my past, and she understands that she understands what I really need as a runner and as a person to be focusing on. And so we rarely talk about goal marathon pace, and like other friends who are also training for this marathon, like they've asked me, what my goal marathon pace is, and I'm actually like, honestly, this is something I don't even know. Like I gotta, maybe I should talk with my coach and like have some idea of what that is. But really, we go by a lot of like perceived effort, and I've been learning to recognize how stress is stress, regardless. It could be good stress, like, Boston Marathon weekend when I was, hosting friends and we were attending like events day in and day out for those 4 days, basically. All of that adds up, in your body. And actually, during that weekend, I was supposed to run a 20 miler and it ended up being a 14 and a half miler. And I was crushed and I was so angry with myself and frustrated. But really just had to like talk things through, process it with my coach, and like be reminded of just evaluating, like, did I give my best effort, with everything going on? And am I proud of the effort that I put forth? And if I can say yes to that with sincerity, then like, yeah, that's a good run, that's a good day. So yeah, that's where I am right now. Yeah, that's what I'm working on.
It's so fascinating because I had such a similar experience around Boston, and yeah, stress is stress, right? Like I had a 16 or something long run scheduled on Saturday, and I didn't even run Saturday. I ran a few extra miles on that Thursday, and had to be okay with it because life doesn't revolve around running. Running fits into life. It can be a big part of it, but there are other pieces that sometimes need to be prioritized, or always need to be prioritized. Um, I'm curious about going back to something you said when you were talking about how you found running and how it fits into your life. You said you used running to gain acceptance. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think at that time, and I think often, maybe even for me, okay, I guess, just going back to how I started running, and because of like the disordered eating habits, and I think what I meant by that in that season of life, I was trying to gain acceptance, whether it was like amongst my peers, and also just, I think, just kind of like in life, in whatever I believed the expectations were of me. I think I've realized now, looking back, growing up as an Asian American in a very majority white, affluent white environment, both in middle school, high school, and in college. I think I had a lot of struggle trying to really come into who I was and where I fit in. My parents, they're immigrants from Taiwan, and a large part of my childhood was spent, within this Chinese Taiwanese immigrant community in Houston. And so, and my parents really worked hard at instilling a sense of like pride and honor, in our heritage. And I mean, my sister and I, we grew up also taking, Chinese school lessons every week. And at any given point, we would have different relatives living with us. And so as a kid, I did feel a sense of like, there was no question of like, yeah, like we're Chinese, we're American, and, this is how we navigate life. But then it wasn't until we moved into this neighborhood, starting when I started middle school, where it was predominantly white, that I started to experience and witness more of the discrimination and rejection, I would just say, of people who look like me, and also just seeing the ways that even the adults in my community and my Chinese community were treated by other white Americans. It just, I think it made me feel a lot of shame, and embarrassment and rejection. I rejected, I should say, my own heritage and cultural background. And so, and, like, I think for any of us to deny a part of who we are and reject that, it is going to cause a lot of, I don't know, I think it will cause a lot of internal identity crisis, and turmoil. And I think that's what I entered college with. And on one hand, like knowing that my Asianness, I guess, like wasn't something that I could just like change externally, yet longing so much for acceptance into this like Abercrombie and Fitch type of image, that was the predominant narrative at the time. That's kind of like, I think that's what fueled this, I guess, the disordered eating type of behavior, and the rigid sense of like the rigid rules that I had established for myself in how much I needed to exercise and what I needed to, I don't know, attain. Yeah, that's what I mean by how running was a tool for acceptance.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Um, and you've been able to use that for such good through Diversity Run and through your other efforts in the trail community. So, first, can you share what Diversity Run is?
Yeah, yeah. Diversity Run is the Instagram platform that I created a few years ago. And every week it is where I share the running journey and experience of a person of color. And it started after basically like, I think I recognized how a person's race and our culture, it strongly influences a person's entry into the sport of running, and it continues to impact and shape our experience in this sport and in this, so-called running community space, like on a regular basis. And I think it's important to acknowledge, not to like shame anybody per se, but it's important to acknowledge just so like everyone, all of us, are aware that like there's not a singular way to be a runner. There's not a singular way to experience running. And if we as a running community as a whole, if we do want to truly say we want to grow in being an inclusive and safe sport, then it's important that we understand the different ways in which each of us actually does experience the sport of running. So that is what Diversity Run is. It's basically like a storytelling platform account, and it's hopefully a place where people can find connections, and experience having windows and mirrors, right, in our life.
Very cool. And what does inclusivity mean to you?
Mm. Inclusivity, I think, yeah, I feel like that word now is like such a hot button word. But in general, I think just I kind of see it as like a belonging, that everyone does desire to belong in some form or fashion, and that is really closely tied to acceptance. Going back to that, and how I think real inclusion means that every person has the space to feel safe in being fully who they are. Yeah.
It's interesting you framed it around belonging. The more I talk to people, the more conversations I have on this podcast, the more people I meet, and ask questions of, the more clear it is that like fundamentally that's what everyone's looking for. Like to feel like they belong, or to feel like they're
Hmm.
heard, or to feel like they're
Hmm.
seen, whether it's mental health, whether it's therapy, whether it's faith, whether it's the color of your skin or how you talk or where you're from or whatever. Like everyone just wants to feel accepted, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, And it's one of the reasons I love conversations like this, conversations about therapy, conversations about things that people conventionally don't talk about. Because somebody is probably listening to this saying, wow, like these are the thoughts going through my head right now, and I feel seen. I just did a podcast with Brett Biggert, the CEO of Freedom Solar Power, and here's a guy who's CEO of a $100 million company, and he talks about his experience with alcoholism and alcohol abuse, and being broke and not having a job, and the feet and challenges with mental health and relationships with others. And I got so much feedback from that one saying that's
Mm-hmm.
me.
Yeah.
And that's like, I was talking with Jason Hardrath, who shared about his experience with endurance sport in his own capacity, in his own right. And he was like, I got a note that said, from somebody who was struggling, like you're sharing what you are going through makes me think I can too.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what
Mm-hmm.
we're all like. That's what we're here for. And so
Yeah.
I'm friends with the two guys that started November Project, and early on they talked about how feedback like that is what they call payday, and you
Nice.
can't buy
Mm-hmm.
that type of feeling. There's nothing that achieves that kind of feeling besides just doing it
Yeah.
and getting that. And you talk about at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about you're here to help others, you're here to make the world a better place. I'm going to reference a conversation I've referenced 30 times on this podcast now, but the last conversation I ever had with my grandfather, he shared the purpose of life is to leave the world a better place than when you entered it. And you're doing it with these conversations. You're doing it with Diversity Run. You're doing it with what you're doing in the trail world, and it's really cool to see, and it's really cool for me to be able to highlight someone who's doing such cool stuff. So thank you for doing what you're doing and making so many people feel like they belong.
Thanks. I mean, it really, yeah, you're right. Like, I think all of us, at the core, we long to be seen and known and understood, right? And if we can just make one person even, feel that way, like that's powerful. And yeah, it's funny. Like I started to take screenshots of whenever somebody does send a message to share with me, whether it's an athlete who was the featured runner on Diversity Run or just like a follower of Diversity Run. But it's just really interesting to see the concept of, having windows and mirrors, play out where like for so many of the runners who share their stories on Diversity Run, that's like the first time they have ever just been so open about their experiences as a person of color, as a runner of color, in the sport. And it's scary, right? To put yourself out there to share vulnerably, but then to hear from others who read their stories of how it's like, oh, yeah, exactly like what you're saying, like, that was my experience too. Or yeah, that's what my relatives are always saying to me, or that kind of stuff. Like that helps everyone feel seen and known that much more deeply. And yeah, I mean, I have this little folder on my phone that like where I save all these screenshots because yeah, we just sometimes I just need to be reminded
Totally.
of this like greater perspective and greater purpose.
Thanks again to Hydro for supporting the podcast. I've been enjoying my Hydro to fit in bonus cardio that doesn't take much time at all, as even a 10 to 15 minute row feels like a solid workout. It's a fun experience to be able to row on familiar routes or explore new ones on the water. Head to hydro.com, that's HYDROW.com to learn more. Be sure to use the code FTLR100 to save $100 on your order. Thanks again to Freedom Solar Power for supporting this episode of the podcast and our environment by providing an easy, green energy source. The buying process was fascinating and eye-opening, and I am excited to pay my learnings forward. If you're curious about going solar in your home, message me on Twitter or Instagram, and I'd be happy to help your journey by providing some great resources. Freedom Solar is a full-service solar company that's been installing solar panels and backup power systems since 2007. They operate in Texas, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida. Not in any of those states? Don't fret, my parents have the same panels from SunPower that were installed by a different company in Massachusetts. SunPower is the best in the business, and that's what Freedom Solar uses. I've enjoyed working with the whole team over at Freedom Solar, and I'm sure you will too. Thanks again to Tracksmith for supporting the podcast and their continued support of not just this podcast, but the running community in general. I'm proud to partner with Tracksmith, and they're going to donate 5% of your order to the Michael J. Fox Foundation for all orders, and you'll also get free shipping. The Michael J. Fox Foundation is dedicated to finding a cure and helping those living with Parkinson's. Both of my grandfathers have or had Parkinson's, and I'm grateful of Tracksmith's support for something so personal. Visit tracksmith.com/forthelongrun to see some of my favorite pieces, and all orders with the code FORTHELONGRUN, one word, will contribute towards this donation. Their spring collection is now available and features staples thoughtfully designed for this season of training. It's funny you mentioned if you could help one person, it's worth it. I had a conversation with Joe Holder on the podcast a while back, and I made a comment to him. I was like, man, you have 200,000 followers and you're having an impact on all of them. And isn't that so cool? He's like, man, I don't care. If I help one person, that's a win.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, I referenced there's a saying, it's related to the Holocaust, but you save one life, you save a world entire. And for that one person, that's their whole world. That is the whole world. And so I think it's a really good way to frame it, that you don't have to help 100,000 people. You don't have to help 1,000 people. You just have to help one and go from there. And if helping that one person has a snowball effect, even better.
Yeah.
So talk to me about how your running now plays into your relationship with the community and your own, how you feel as a runner on the trails, and how your relationship with running has changed over the last, call it, you said your first marathon was 2003? 2004?
Yeah.
So how has your relationship with running changed in those, that's only 4 years, right?
Yeah, I'm still a spring chick. Oh gosh.
It's like doing the math now. It's like, oh yeah, from 1990. It's 10 years.
Nope. Not even going to try to do the math on that right now. I'm really glad to reflect upon the ways that running has both, like running and myself, have changed since 2004, thankfully. In regards to, the running, I mean, not the running, the trail running space, I still feel very, very new and novice to the trail running world. You're
my doing
first
things like Trans Rockies.
Woo! That was. I just got to dive in to the deep end, I guess. Oh yeah, I think part of the intimidation for me of trails was just also that I didn't feel like I knew anybody who was a trail runner. It just seemed like the majority of the people around me here, locally, but also on Instagram and social media, most people are road runners. And so I didn't even know there was a difference between road running and trail running. I just thought that, some people ran in the mountains and some people just ran in the streets, in their neighborhoods. I had no idea
and some
how
people
different.
do both.
Yes. Oh my gosh. But I mean, I got this invitation and learned that it is very different. But anyway, sorry, I'm trying to going back to your question though. I think trails intimidated me, I think, because a lot of it reminded me of my, I guess, just environment growing up in high school and in college, where, I was a minority in so many ways. And it seemed like a world that I didn't know the rules to operate within. And And not only that, like as a female, just kind of thinking about safety, um, it scared me to think that I would be then like kind of alone and trying to figure things out in the woods. And so that's why like I was always kind of deterred from that. But when this opportunity to participate in Trans Rockies run in Colorado came up, I felt like honestly, like even though there was very few people who looked like me, whether as like Asian American or female, in that arena, like I could either just kind of like turn down this opportunity because of that reason, or I could say, well, then like it's not going to change if nothing changes. So I decided, okay, well, I'm going to step into the arena then, if anything. And if I want to see the narrative and if I want to see the landscape, figuratively speaking, of this sport change, then like I want to be a part of changing it. I got to do something about it. So that was my first foray and entry into trails. And that really has been kind of representative, I think, of what running has become for me, especially after, with Ahmaud Arbery's killing in 2020, and with the finally, what it feels like finally, the heightened sense of social awareness that the running industry was coming to, it then provided more opportunities. Like people were more willing to talk and try to understand how it is that race intersects and is intertwined within this sport that we love, And so now, if there are other opportunities that come up for me directly, or even like opportunities for me to like amplify and lift up and recommend, other runners of color to step into the spotlight for different things, then yeah, like I want to do that. And I want to elevate our voices. I want to make our faces seen more. And I want to give people the opportunity to share their stories and be seen and heard, So that's been a cool change in the sport for me.
For sure. So your point about change doesn't happen unless change happens is like the epitome of inertia, right? Like it's hard to get something in motion, but once it's in motion, there's often more motion. And so
Mhm.
we need people who are, willing to run up mountains at 10,000 feet in order to see change. And I mean, kudos to you for like I would think long and hard prior to doing an event like that. And like I run trails frequently and I live at altitude. So that was a hell of a way to start. But again, it speaks to your tenacity and desire to challenge yourself and challenge the community. Um, One of the topics that I like to discuss on the podcast is success and growth versus process. And I guess I'll switch the order on that.
Hmm.
Do you find yourself more focused on a specific outcome or the process along the way? And I'll explain why I'm curious in a second.
I mean, I think by default, I'm definitely outcome driven, and I was just having this conversation with my coach over the weekend, because, I just want to get faster, or I just want to have qualified for Boston already,
What
and
does that
like,
mean for you? Why?
yeah, exactly. Right. Like that, those are the deeper questions, which I'm like, oh, I don't want to answer. I don't want to think through this. But yeah, like I hate that it's about the process.
What What is Boston? What does running Boston mean for you? And I ask this as someone who spent 4 years trying to be Q before it finally happened. So I've been there in my own experience for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, this is exactly what I've been thinking through this week. Of, it's never, like the goals that we have for ourselves, like it's never just about the goal itself, right? It stems from something inside us. And for me, I first decided to start pursuing this goal of qualifying for Boston back in 2017, I think. Yeah, 2017. And really, at that point in my life, my husband and I, so we had been married 9 years, but for majority of those years, he had really been struggling with undiagnosed anxiety and depression. But we didn't know that that's what it was. And also within those 9 years, we had moved 6 times. We had two kids. We gave birth to two babies. And he had also gotten his master's, PhD, and also postdoctorate. And
Whoa.
so, like, there was just a lot of stuff that had happened within these 9 years. And at that point, we had been living in Boston, and just basically, like, the depression was getting really, really bad. And I think we had just been in this really dark season in our marriage for years, and it had gotten to this breaking point. And we finally, after hitting what felt like the fifth, 10th rock bottoms, we finally started to actually get help with counseling and then also with medication. And so 2017 was that first, like, light at the end of the tunnel that I was able to kind of see. And there was finally kind of this, like, breathing space for me, as I had been not only trying to, like, raise our two very young kids in this new state that we were in, but also trying to support my husband this whole time. And so as soon as I got this, like, breathing space, I didn't realize it at the time, but subconsciously, I think for me, I needed something just, like, for myself, that was my own. And yes, running had been there, all these years. But I think that was that first opportunity where I felt like I'm going to go after this, like, I want to actually try to finally, like, pursue something for me, to challenge myself in a way that I wanted to be challenged, as opposed to, like, the challenge of life that I didn't anticipate necessarily, but that, like, I had to take on. And so that's kind of how, I guess, the concept of qualifying for Boston came about for me. And yeah, I mean, like I said, that was 2017. It is now 2022. And so it has been quite a journey in and of itself. Um, but yeah, I think unraveling that a little bit more, I am just someone who does want to pursue avenues of growth. Like, I want to grow, and I know that growth only comes through through challenges, through taking on challenges. And so maybe that's why I want to just see what I can do, right? So
So 2017 through 2022, how has your approach to that goal shifted? And I caveat that by saying, for me, it didn't happen until I stopped squeezing the egg, right? I had
mhm,
my friend Tansy on the podcast last March, and she talked about how we should hold goals tight to our chest in a like, picture it like an egg, and if you have to hold the egg, but if you squeeze it too hard, it cracks.
mhm,
And I was holding the egg too hard, and it kept cracking. And
mhm,
I lined up for 4 marathons. I ran 3:20s, and my slowest was 4:01 in the
mhm,
quest to break 3. And it didn't finally happen until I got to a start line, and I was like, this is a celebration. I'm going to see what I'm capable of on this day, but more importantly, I'm going to celebrate the thousands of miles that it took me to get here. And I started that race running 640s. And I was like, this is the easiest running I've ever experienced. And I was free. And I kept running like that for 15 miles, and, 640s, 650s, 630s. And I had never felt that free. and the egg was still there, but it was a soft, like it was just there.
Mhm.
It didn't need to be there. And I crossed that finish line and I just screamed when I saw 259. And I actually screamed
Mm.
right in someone's face. And then I apologized to her. She was handing me a medal.
I'd
um,
be screaming too.
um, but then I was like, oh my God, I completely shifted my perspective around racing and training for a race. And that wasn't even a race I was training for. I was just training. And my coach was like, hey, you're pretty fit. You want to run a marathon in 6 weeks?
Oh, wow.
And I
Yeah.
said, sure. And so the reason I share that is because I needed a total transformation of how I approached a goal.
Mhm.
And I was way too outcome driven in a community where I thought a 3:30 marathon was slow. And so I was putting so much pressure on myself to perform just to feel like I could fit in this group of
Mhm.
insanely fit people that was like really not representative of the running community in general. So I'm curious how your experience has shifted over the years and how you're hoping it continues to shift as you keep that egg softly grasped in your hand.
Yeah, definitely. You see, this is kind of a testament to how outcome driven like I am by nature, where like I'm already thinking in my mind, yeah, see, like that's the end goal right there to get to this point of like not
Screaming in the
being
face of the person.
no, it's just like I want to be so not outcome driven that I'm going to be the best at not being outcome driven. You know what I'm saying? It's like, no, wait.
So you should
I
listen to
mean,
the first to episodes 50 to 200 of this podcast, and it'll whip you right into process shape.
Gosh, yeah. I mean, I am certain I'm still in the process of learning to like surrender while still aiming aiming in the direction that I want to go, you know? Um
Do you think failure
Definitely.
has helped you mold that?
Oh yeah, for sure. And just even being able to like redefine what failure actually is and what purpose it serves, like in 2017 when I first set out to qualify, I really just thought that like, okay, we can accomplish whatever we set our minds to, and I'm going to hire a coach, which I did, and we got a training plan going, and I'm going to execute every single workout perfectly, and then like I'm going to qualify for Boston. Like boom, boom, boom.
On the
That's
flip
how.
side, I see your 14 and a half miles that you did around the Boston Marathon that should have been 20 as being more successful than if you executed 20 miles on that weekend.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that?
Why do you
You
think I
think that
think
it is,
that?
or
Yeah.
oh, because I'm gonna learn through. I don't know, now I feel like I'm like put on the spot in class or something. I mean, there's like lessons to be learned through like why that happened and like how I respond to that as well, right? Like, is that the right answer?
Yeah, no, I think
Jonathan, tell me.
the response to this is the lesson, right? Like
Mm, mhm,
Jesse Thomas on his podcast with Lauren Fleshman a number of years ago talked about how a plan is just a plan and it's a bad plan if you always follow it. It's a good plan if you adapt, and it's a good plan if you let life create those adaptations. And so by you not achieving a perfect execution of the plan and being malleable in certain places, that sets you up for that longer term growth, I think. Again, this is just my hypothesis after having 150 to 200 conversations with people who have achieved objective levels of success as well as subjective levels of success, right? A lot of the people I've spoken to define success around growth. Exactly what you said. You want to see how good you can get. You control that. You control every aspect of if you do the work. the work doesn't have to lead to the outcome, but if you do the work, it probably will lead to the outcome. And so for me, that's what it took. I had to become flexible. I actually ran a bunch of trails and realized that numbers are just numbers, and
Yeah.
the process of doing a 6-hour run that covered the same distance as a 2-hour run, like that was helpful as well.
Yeah.
Um, but it was so fascinating, right? Because I used to be very outcome driven, and it was a failure if I didn't achieve a certain goal.
Hmm.
And I didn't understand the alternative. I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. And it's so fascinating that so many amateurs are outcome driven, whereas pros are process driven, where pros need the outcomes to keep contracts.
Yeah.
And they've figured out that if they focus on, can I be good today? Can I be good tomorrow? Can I be good the next day and the day after and the next 1,000 days?
Hmm.
Eventually they execute. And so it's fascinating to have these conversations with people who are both in it and people who are on the other side of it, right? I think that a lot of the people listening are probably in the same boat that you and I are in or have been in and are trying to figure it out as well.
Yeah, that's making me think about how, I guess, in the amateur running world, we all come to the sport with like a myriad of reasons and goals, and it's a lot more layered, you know, um, as to why we choose to show up every day. And our goals really do, the outcomes that we're like longing for and wanting, um yeah, they're layered and complicated, not complicated, complex, I should say. um and it's worth kind of like pulling that thread and like getting deeper as to like what it is we're actually desiring, you know because it does make me wonder. I mean, especially in this, with social media, right? I think it's easy to get focused and fixated on the outcome of whether it's like qualifying for Boston or running under a certain time, or even just like completing a certain distance race, that like there's almost this sense of like, so many people will say I'm not a real runner because I haven't run a blank
I
distance
said
like,
that. Yeah.
race,
That's like
right?
why I ran a marathon.
To qualify yourself as a runner.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. I mean,
Everyone else was doing it.
right. Yeah. That really, it's kind of like, no, no, no. Why do you yourself have that as the qualifier to define whether or not you're a legit runner, or whether or not you find yourself acceptable, you know?
I think it gets back to what we were saying before, which is everyone just wants to fit in. And
Yeah.
for a lot of people, fitting in looks like, yeah, I've run a marathon. Yeah, I've
Mm-hmm.
BQ'd. Yeah, I've done this, I've done that. I read Lauren Fleshman's article about why the 5K freaking rocks, is what she titled it in Runner's World. And I was like, yeah, this is awesome. And I spent a year training for a 5K, and I felt the need to qualify that I was training for a fast 5K, not a 5K. And I would tell people I was training for a 5K. They were like, cool, great. Like, you're a new runner. I
Good
was
job,
like,
buddy.
no, I'm like trying to run under 18 minutes. And it was such like a strange experience where I felt compelled to add the qualifier of a
Mhm.
fast 5K. And
Yeah.
for some, 25 minutes is fast, and for some, 30 minutes is fast.
Mhm.
But for me, it had to be, that word had to be in there. And I wonder what I would say now if I chose to train for a fast. There, I just said it. There's the
For
answer.
another fast 5K.
Shit. Well, I don't have to go through that exercise because I just did. Our brains are so fascinating, right?
Oh gosh. I mean, yeah.
So what's next for you? What's on the roadmap or trail map, you could say, for 2022?
Well, I know that I have two marathons lined up for this year. One is Chicago, because I finally got into the Chicago Marathon via lottery. So that'll be in October. And then I figured, well, I don't want that to be like, I have not run a marathon since 2018. And so I didn't want Chicago to be my kind of like re-entry into running a marathon. So then that's why I signed up to run the Sugarloaf Marathon in May. So that's in a few weeks. Just
That's
because
an
I don't
awesome
know.
race.
Oh, it is? So you've run it before?
I've not run it. I've spectated it a couple of times.
What makes it awesome? Like, why do you say that it's awesome? I
I
want
mean,
to
it's
know.
gorgeous, first of
Oh,
all.
okay.
The time of year is great. And then if you have people who are going to spectate, you specifically, it's really easy to do that because it's a point-to-point race. And so they can just see you every 3 miles, 5 miles, whatever. It's like really accessible by car.
Okay.
And the
Yeah,
weather's
that's
usually
it.
pretty good.
Okay,
But I
cool,
love
cool,
that
cool.
you're running a marathon to prep for a marathon.
I
That's so
mean,
runner of
this
you.
is, I just don't like, like I don't want to be caught off guard again by like how uncomfortable it's going to get, and then like have to deal with all of that stuff, like the emotions and all of that, in the midst of a Chicago, like in the midst of a world major. Like I want to just enjoy it and experience it. And so anyway,
Cool.
that's my reasoning. So those are the things that I definitely have lined up. But I mean, honestly, I am looking forward to finishing this, marathon training cycle so that I can get back out onto the trails. Like I miss running the trails, and I haven't been able to do as much, now that like I had been, ramping up the road marathon training, and I just don't want to like risk rolling my ankle or anything like that. But man, like I was just driving by. I don't even remember where I was driving the other day, but passed by like what looked like a trail area, off the side of the road. And I was like, oh, I wonder where that leads. Like, oh, I want to get back out there. So I am looking forward to that, for the
Love the
summertime, I guess.
love the curiosity. I find myself doing the same thing, like peering down trailheads, like, I wonder what's around that corner.
Yeah.
The best solution for that is a gravel bike.
Oh, well, okay. I have a rusty old hybrid bike that I got secondhand from my neighbor. So I don't
Nice.
know that I'll be bringing that.
That'll do. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences and more about your why. It's really why this podcast exists, to like have the conversation that we just had and unpack like the meaning behind chasing goals. And this was a really fun one. So thanks for opening up and sharing.
Yeah. Thanks for this therapy session, basically.
Well, if people want to follow along with you and your adventures, where can we find you on social?
On Instagram, I am at I Run for the Glory. And then my other platform is at Diverse We Run. It's also on Instagram. So those are the easiest places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you out there.
Awesome. Bye-bye.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next time on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too. This podcast and the accompanying music has been produced by Brian Walters of Single Track Sound. For the Long Run's logo was created by Vanessa Wolf of Sterling Wolf. Show notes have been written by Ruby Wiles and is managed by Emily Holland. It takes a village.